SFBBO, promoting sustainability by engaging communities for more than 40 years. Our Birdy Hour speaker series is a free virtual program. On April 22nd, 2025, SFBBO Science Director Dr. Katie LaBarbera gave a talk, Feathers, Flocks, and Fire, Recent Science from Coyote Creek Field Station, for our community.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie LaBarbera. I'm the Science Director for the Landbird program. I've worked on birds since undergrad, but in the birding community, that's not that big of a credential. Obviously, there's lots of people who've been birding since they were, 4. So really, I'm a latecomer to birds. But yeah, I've worked on birds a little bit on the East Coast, a lot out here. I did my Ph.D. on dark-eyed juncos at Berkeley, and have been with SFBBO in some form or another since 2012. I came as a volunteer and got trained by Josh Scullin, who I saw in the Zoom here, and yeah, I'm just gonna start, I think, because the birds are more interesting. So today I want to talk to you about some of the science that we either have done in the last year or are currently doing at Coyote Creek Field Station. And anytime I talk about bird banding, I want to just quickly address a concern that you might have if you are not used to bird banding data, which is that we're going to show people handling birds and measuring birds, and we're going to talk about capturing birds. And I don't want you to be sitting there worrying whether the birds are okay. So just to get this out of the way, the birds are definitely okay. When we do this work, bird safety is our top priority. There's a code of bird banding ethics that specifically says that, and we have it posted where we work. Anyone who's handling birds gets extensively trained. That's very important to know how to handle birds safely. We watch the birds carefully for any signs of stress, and we will stop and release them if they look like they're getting stressed out. And we also only do this in the first place if we have a good reason. And by a good reason, I mean some scientific question that we think will help bird conservation, right? And sometimes it's direct, it's related to habitat conservation or monitoring populations. And sometimes it's a little more abstract, related to bird behavior. But we only do this because we think, a little bit of being handled by humans is worth the benefit to bird populations. And everyone who does this got into it because we love the birds. There's nobody wants to wake up at 4 a.m. and be out in the dark and the bugs and the poison oak and everything. If you don't love the birds. So we are as worried about them as you are, and don't worry about that as you see the rest of this talk. So I'm going to talk a bit about what bird banding is. I know a lot of folks here either already know or are bird banding volunteers, so I'm not going to, I won't spend too much time on it, but I also want to give some background in case you're not familiar. So we catch birds using mist nets, which you can see here. They are a very fine nets that are hard to see if you look at them straight on. And the birds just go about their regular activity and fly into the nets. The nets are springy, and the birds get caught in the net and then end up hanging down in the net, sort of like a hammock. So that's what this looks like. The birds usually try to grab the net with their feet, so that's what's happening here. Again, this is something you should only do if you've had extensive training. You also legally need federal and state permits to do this, which we do have. Notice that on the right, the bird in that net already has one of these bird bands. So it's called bird banding because we put these metal leg bands on the birds. The leg bands have a unique number. Only that bird has that number, and that lets us identify that individual anytime we catch it. We then take other data on the birds. We want to start with what species is it? And For that, we often end up using the same resource that you might use. We do have Sibley bird guides at the bird banding station. We also will refer to this giant book called Pile that is sort of the bird banding, the big bird banding reference. And we look up what things we need to distinguish species and subspecies. In some cases, that's easy. In some cases, it's an Empidonax flycatcher and it's a little trickier. But we always want to know who we're banding, and then we take other measurements. There we go. So these can be literally measurements, like measuring wing length or tarsus length, tarsus being one of the leg bones. We will also look at the feathers of the bird. That can give you a lot of information. You can look for new feathers that are growing in. On the left, you see a song sparrow that has some older, duller, browner feathers. And then in the middle, these newer, darker feathers that he's just molting in. Those feathers are different colors because the browner, lighter ones have been faded by the sun. So they all started out the same color, but as they're in the sun longer, they get old and worn, and so the birds molt in new ones. On the right, you have two chestnut-backed chickadees. The one on the left is an adult, probably the parent of the one on the right. And there is a little bit of difference in adult versus juvenile plumage with chickadees, but mostly the difference you're seeing there in color is just due to one of them having had those feathers for a year and gone through a rough breeding season, and the other one, being about 3 weeks old. So those are nice fresh feathers. But we can tell things about bird age and sort of wear and tear based on their feathers. Whoops, I think I skipped did I skip? Yeah. You can also look under birds' feathers. So we do this usually by blowing on the birds, which looks a little silly, but it just uses the air of your breath to move the feathers out of the way. And underneath their feathers, birds are hiding all kinds of things. Breeding females are often hiding something called a brood patch, which is what you see here. So this is the same bird on the left and the right. She looks completely normal, but then if you move the feathers out of the way, you can see that she has a naked patch on her belly, and she has, under the skin, amassed fluid, which lets her transfer heat more efficiently to her eggs. So that means she has eggs. So we can look for signs like that, that let us know birds are breeding. We can also look for other things. So this is just a quick bird anatomy orientation. So this is art by an artist who likes to draw birds without their feathers. So if you take bird feathers away, they look quite different. And I specifically want you to notice where this arrow is pointing right above and between those big pectoral muscles that are for flying, right at the base of the neck. There's a sort of dip called a furcular hollow. And that is where birds store their fat. And so when we blow the feathers away, we can look for fat there. And that's what you see here. These birds are both fine. It's a weird view to look at birds, but they're fine. But if you blow the feathers out of the way, you can see that furcular hollow. On the left, that bird has very little fat in the furcular hollow. On the right, it's completely full of that paler colored fat. We can also weigh birds. We weigh them in cups, which always looks silly, but we only keep them in the cups for a second, just to stop them from flying away while we weigh them. And you can see they can perch on the edge of the cups. We look for other things too. For example, eye color can tell you things about some birds. Bush tits, you can tell the sex by eye color. Males have dark eyes, females have light eyes. Sometimes we get birds that seem to be sort of half and half, and that is confusing. And hopefully we catch them again and can figure out what's going on there. Sometimes it just means that they're going from being young to being older, because young birds also have dark eyes. Also, speaking of age, often eyes can tell you about birds' age. So these are spotted towhees. On the left, we have a very young spotted towhee with a dark eye. In the middle, we have a first-year bird, but a little older. He's in the middle of molting into his molting out of his juvenile plumage. And he has a slightly lighter eye. And then on the right, we have a full adult with that striking red eye. So all of this kind of data lets us know things like age, sex, condition, whether they're breeding, stuff like that. But often the most important data we're collecting is species and specifically individual, right? That specific number, that bird. When we catch it, we always record the date and the time. And then where, we know exactly where we've caught them. And getting those repeat encounters basically with an individual tells you things like lifespan, habitat use, and other stuff we're going to talk about for now. So the other stuff is cool, but the crucial thing is often just seeing the same bird over and over and over. Yeah. And then when you put lots of those together, you're seeing lots of birds over and over and over. So I mentioned Empidonax flycatchers. We have something we call Western flycatcher season, which is in the fall, September through October. We get lots and lots of first year Western flycatchers. So this is a photo from then. But when you put all these individuals together, you get a sense of population size. And over time, you can look at things like species abundance over the years. So this is just 4 species that we get over about 30-ish years. Actually, this is over 40-ish years. And we can look for trends in species abundance. And this is sort of the most fundamental level of what we're doing is watching for changes, and then sometimes we see a change that is alarming, and that can drive us to take other actions. This is sort of the fundamental level, but I think it's also not as satisfying in some things, because you look at these graphs and what you want is an explanation, right? You don't want to just know the line is wiggling. You want to know why it's wiggling. So the first project I want to talk about has to do with looking at why those lines might be wiggling. Specifically with regards to wildfires. Whether you live in California or not, I'm sure you've noticed the wildfires increasing recently, and of course that's at least partly attributable to climate change causing extreme weather, often extreme drought, and then fires, things like that. So wildfires are increasing in intensity and frequency. And that impacts us. It also impacts wildlife. And birds are a special concern because birds are very sensitive to airborne pollutants. So you've probably heard the phrase, a canary in a coal mine, right? And that was a real thing, taking canaries into coal mines, because canaries are more susceptible to toxic gases than humans. And so you could use your canary as an early detector for these toxic gases. It would keel over before you would, and then you would know to get out of the mine. But that means in general, birds are sensitive to these airborne pollutants. And so we know that we've had bad wildfires. We know that there's often smoke. Birds can generally fly away from a fire, but smoke can travel very far. As you'll know, there have been days where we've gotten smoke in California that we know came from Oregon or even British Columbia. So what impact is that having on the birds? We've had a few bad wildfire seasons, bad smoke seasons rather, at CCFS, and that is valuable data for asking this question. And this is, you can see one of the purple air. I'm sure everyone remembers spending lots of time on purple air in 2020. And that was the purple air from one of those days. And everything was orange. This is from 2020. So this led to this paper, and I just wanted to stop and mention that this is not my solo magnum opus. Everything we do is extremely collaborative, starting with the data collection, but also I mean, you almost never do research alone. People have different expertises, different ideas. It's good to run ideas past each other. We always want to be training new scientists. Um, we want to be bringing in resources we don't have. And so all of this work is a collaboration. In this case, this paper was partly an opportunity to train this undergraduate, Anna Nihei, who did I mean, I say training, but she did a great job. She was excellent. Um, it was also started by and largely driven by this postdoctoral researcher who was with UCLA and also with something called Project Phoenix, which if you're interested in wildfires, go check out Project Phoenix. They're doing more of this sort of bird and wildfire research. And then this was all in the lab of a professor at UCLA who is a statistics expert. And so Olivia was bringing sort of fire expertise. Professor Tingley was bringing stats expertise. Anna was bringing youthful enthusiasm, and I was bringing bird banding data. And the actual graphs for this end up looking a little complicated because it gets tricky because of how variable these smoke concentrations in the air are. So don't spend a lot of time trying to interpret these graphs. I wanted to put them up because they're pretty and I want to assure you that we did actually do the data analysis, but the real results from this paper are much, much better represented by this diagram. So we found that there's two different ways that wildfire impacts birds. There's a difference between acute and chronic exposure. So acute is where there's a lot of smoke on one day. So it's really bad for a single day. That's an acute exposure. Chronic exposure is where there's been smoke around for a while. It's sort of part of your long-term environment. Probably at a lower level than the acute exposure, but it's this repeated exposure. And we found that these two had different impacts on the birds. So for acute exposure, we found that recent high levels of smoke caused birds to decrease in body mass. We also found that it caused us to capture fewer birds. So we think what's happening there is it's a really bad smoke day. The birds don't want to be breathing that. The way to breathe less is to move less. And so they just hunker down. They don't move around as much to try to take in less of that material. And so they lose some mass because they're not foraging. And also we don't capture them because they're not flying around. On the other hand, chronic exposure, so, weeks of bad smoke, actually causes the opposite. We see higher capture rates if there's been a lot of smoke. It doesn't increase body mass. It's not good for the birds, but it does increase capture rates. And we think what's happening there is that they have to basically make up for this initial decrease in activity. So when the smoke first gets bad, they hunker down and they just try not to be active. As it lasts longer and longer, they can't stay hunkered down. They have to get out and eat. And so they come out, and at that point, they have to move more to make up for what they were doing. This is important to know for a few reasons. One is just to know that wildfire smoke is impacting birds at all. It's also important to notice that this is an impact that isn't just the birds dying, right? We're seeing decreases and increases in mass and in activity levels, but these are sublethal effects, but they're still impacting the birds. They may make them more susceptible to diseases, to predators. It may mean that the breeding season later is harder. And it's important to remember that you don't have to see a massive bird die off to have something that is concerning for bird populations. And it was also actually this increase in capture rates was a surprise to us, and it was a good reminder that just because something happens and then you suddenly see more birds doesn't necessarily mean that something great has happened for the birds. I think of it a little bit like a migratory fallout, if you're familiar with that, where if birds are flying across the ocean as part of migration and then there's a storm, they will all, land on the coast to get away from the storm. And it seems like it's, bird utopia, birds everywhere, but they're all actually exhausted and would rather not be there. So just thinking about patterns you see. Um, if you see a lot of birds, is this a good thing? That kind of thing. The second thing I want to talk about is feathers. So again, I've brought back this slightly scary picture. Oh, I'm way late. Okay. That's okay. I might skip our third thing. Um, the slightly scary picture to remind you what birds look like without their feathers. Uh, so think about how different these two pictures look, right? Birds with feathers look very different from birds without feathers. Feathers are a third of a bird's entire body weight. Just keep that in mind. And I mentioned that birds molt. So here again, we see some birds molting their flight feathers, their primary feathers. Those molting feathers are growing in darker, again, because they haven't been faded by the sun. And why would you molt? Well, you do that because your old feathers get faded, they get eaten by feather mites, they get abraded and broken, and they're your insulation, they're your flight surface, they're how you display to competitors or to potential mates. You really want them to not be broken and faded and full of feather mites. So you regrow them periodically. I want to take a second to talk about energy now, because we're talking about regrowing a third of your body mass. And that's going to take some energy. So, I mean, think about that. Like basically you're regrowing for a human, it would be like, I don't know, a leg and an arm, something like that, regrowing that once a year. It takes a lot of energy to do that. And so issues of energy balance come into play here. So you get energy in as an animal, as a bird, by eating food. You get energy, you lose energy, energy goes out through basically everything else. So growing feathers, maybe growing eggs, any kind of activity, including foraging, but anything birds do, right? Migrating, feeding their babies, flying away from hawks, anything. And even just existing physical maintenance takes energy, maintaining their own temperature, right? If it's hot outside and they need to cool off, or if it's cold and they need to be warmer, immune responses to diseases, healing any injuries they have. All of these things take energy. And so you always have to think about trading these things off. Like you have a limited store of energy, right? And so which of these things are you going to do? And within a bird's sort of yearly life, if we're thinking about an adult bird, there are three big events that take a lot of energy in a fairly small amount of time. One of these is breeding. So if you're the female, you have to lay eggs, you have to make the nest. Some males help make the nest. Some males have to do elaborate displays. That takes energy, or they have to defend their territory. You can think about, you see the male hummingbirds chasing each other all around. That takes a ton of energy. And then they're feeding the babies, following, the babies around to teach them about predators. That all takes energy. Migration, flying very long distances, definitely takes energy. And then molt, which I mentioned, regrowing a third of your body mass, takes energy. There's been a lot of study on climate change and bird breeding and climate change and bird migration. These are not, all the papers. They're basically the first three that I Googled and found, but they're pretty representative. There's been a lot of work on these for good reason. They're very important. We know climate change is impacting breeding and migration in birds. But there's a notable gap here of our three major energy costly events, folks are not studying molt. And you should, because it is another one of these costly events. Thinking about energy balance and kind of coming back to our Bay Area CCFS situation, we live in a very seasonal area. It's not seasonal in the sort of traditional temperate four seasons situation, but it's seasonal in that we have wet and we have dry, right? If you're a bird that eats well, bugs and plants, which is most of your birds, or maybe you eat birds that eat bugs and plants, but same idea, or you eat mice that eat bugs and plants. It all kind of comes back to bugs and plants, right? The wet time, you have lots of food. The dry time, not so much. Oh, I should say these two pictures are both of the same location at Coyote Creek Field Station, just different seasons. When it's nice and wet, everything grows, everything's blooming and making seeds. When it's been dry for a while in September, everything is very dry and there's a lot less bugs. There are some seeds, but not as much. A lot less green stuff. And so there's less food available. So you're a bird, you're thinking about your year, putting together your year calendar. You know you're going to have some good energy times and some lean energy times. Oh, sorry. And I was going to introduce our cast of players too. So specifically for this research, we're focusing on two of our most commonly captured birds, the bushtit on the left, which is a very small bird that likes to live in flocks, which is why there's a bunch of them. And then the song sparrow, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Classic sparrow, it sings, it's around the marshes, it's around forests, it's kind of everywhere. Oh, the main thing here I wanted to say was that it comes in various shapes. It can also be an angry orb, as you can see. All right, but we're looking at these guys, and we're thinking about our seasonal Bay Area and their yearly energy expenditures. So birds need energy for breeding, molt, and migration. Neither of these species migrate, so actually they don't have to worry about that one, so that's easy. So we can cross that off. But as they're planning their year, you want to put the things that need a lot of energy in the season where you can get a lot of food. So ideally, you would breed during the nice lush wet season. And then once you were done breeding, you would molt. And then you would be done molting. And then you could just hang out for the hard dry season. That would work great. However, our years are not predictable. They are increasingly unpredictable as climate change makes everything more variable. So what happens if it's a drought year? What happens if it rains less than usual, or if it's hotter than usual and evaporates more water? That will shorten our nice lush season and increase the length of our bad season. What do? If you just keep the same schedule, one of your energy intensive events is going to fall into this rougher season and you're going to have trouble finding enough energy for it. You could move it back to fit into that nice lush season. You could try shortening it to try to fit it without overlapping with your other event. Do birds do this? Was our big question here. And does it work when they do it? So I want to really quickly say, again, this is a collaborative effort. This work was pretty much entirely the original idea of Julian Titoni, who's pictured here. They're now a grad student at UC Davis. They are the lead on this project. It's turning into their PhD. It's super cool. They are very smart, and it's been a delight to work with them. So to answer this, they looked at 16 years of molt data from CCFS. They ended up looking at data from 408 individual bush tits and 1,400 song sparrows. And what they found was that they actually do both of these things. So the song sparrows push their molt forward. That is, they molt earlier in years when it's hot and dry. So there's more overlap here now between molt and breeding. They found that the bush tits both push their molt forward and they shorten it in these hot and dry years. So the bush tits are doing both. And we specifically see that at CCFS. You can see how you need a lot of years and a lot of birds to answer a question like this. You need to have some drought years and some regular years, and then you need to have enough molting birds to really look at this. So this is where long-term data and a lot of birds becomes really valuable for answering these questions. Okay, so now we know. Cool. Now we know. Is that it? Well, there's concerns here now that we know this. If you advance your molt, if you molt earlier, now you have more overlap between your breeding and your molt. If you shorten your molt duration, you have to grow all those feathers faster. You still have to grow all the feathers, so if you make it shorter, now you're growing them faster. Doing molt and breeding at the same time means you need more energy. Growing your feathers faster means you need more energy. If you don't have more energy, you need to do those things worse. There's no way to get around this kind of trade-off. Either you get more energy or you're worse at these things. And so when the environment is forcing these birds to move their molt or to shorten their molt, they are potentially feeding their babies less or having just fewer babies. They are potentially growing worse feathers, meaning feathers that are more brittle, that break more, that make it harder to stay insulated or to fly. These will impact population sizes and bird survival, things like that. So this is a cost of climate change that we hadn't really seen by just looking at breeding and migration before, seeing how it's impacting this molt. Okay, so for our third thing, I want to talk about, I want to come back again to we were saying, remember one of the key things about this data is you have an individual bird and you catch it, you know where you caught it and when. And then you do that a lot more. You also catch them together. So this is a pair of ruby-crowned kinglets, for example, that came in the net at the same time, obviously very close to each other. We can infer information from this. These birds don't generally end up in the net at the same time right next to each other by chance. These birds were interacting in some way to end up in the net like this. And you can actually use bird banding data to look at social behavior. So this last project I want to talk about is looking at bush tit social associations. In the ad for this talk, I called this friendships. That's, anthropomorphism. I can't promise it's a friendship, but these birds are associating with each other. And they're surely getting something out of that. So this project is looking at almost 7,000 captures of bush tits over 30 years. So looking at data as far back as 1995 and as recent as this year. This is a collaboration with Nicole Fishbein. So again, everything is a collaboration. And these photos, we're not just putting bush tits next to each other to make a cute photo. These are birds that were all captured next to each other. So these are flocks. And there were usually more than 3 of them, but those were all the hands we could get together for a photo at once. So a question I had wanted to know for a long time was, how long do bush tits stay associated? How long do their friendships last? And I had this question initially because at one point I was banding birds and we got in these bush tits that were already banded, and I was writing the band numbers down and found that two of them had sequential band numbers. So we band birds, the bands come sequential, right? So it's like, 178 and then 179. We band them sequentially. If you get birds back with sequential bands, you basically know that they were banded together, right? And so this meant that these two birds had been caught together once and banded, and now I'd caught them together again. So I wondered how common that was and how long they can stay associated. So this is just a histogram of birds that were associated with the same other individual bird at least twice, and how many days apart those associations were. Each of the bins is 30 days. So the first bar here is 0 to 30 days. The next one is 30 to 60, and so on. You can see that there's a lot of associations that last 1 to 2 months, and then they decline, but they don't completely disappear, and our longest associations are more than a year long. These are small birds. They do not live forever. So this doesn't necessarily mean they're having a falling out. They may just not survive that long. But we also know from our recapture data that many of these birds are staying alive for 4, 5, 6, 8 years. So it looks like you can stay associated for a while, but generally not more than a year. Okay, so I thought maybe if I looked at the longest lasting associations, I might see a pattern, right? Like maybe older females stay associated the longest, or maybe siblings that were together as young birds would stay associated. So this is looking at associations that lasted more than 350 days. We only had 6 of them in all of our 30 years of data. And essentially what I found is there is no pattern whatsoever. This is as full of all the possibilities as could possibly happen. So we had one that was 2 older males. We had one that's an older male and a female. We had one that was 2 juvenile females, one that was a young male and an unknown female, one that's an older female and a young female, and one that's an older female and a young male. So every possible combination is having these potentially long associations. So it's not related to sex or age, it looks like. Bushtits just can have these long associations. That analysis is limited by the fact that, I mean, we had almost 7,000 captures of bushtits, but there's a lot of bushtits we're not catching at any given moment. When you're out there, you're very aware, maybe there's 3 bushtits in the net. You can hear 20 of them in the bushes all talking to each other and talking to the ones in the net even. So we're missing a lot of information, and that's always going to be the case. So knowing that it's fragmentary information, that we're struggling to detect these associations, I thought, what if we look within groups of bush tits? Because it's hard to detect, the 2 individual associated bush tits. But if we're looking for anyone within their group, we're more likely to get somebody from the group. So for this analysis, I was looking at bush tits that were in groups, and then did they show up again in a group with at least one bush tit from that other group. So not necessarily that they had been directly associated with each individual at each time, but are they in the same groups as these individuals? Some quick descriptive stats of these groups, just looking at age makeup of groups. So this is all groups of bush tits that was 4 or more bush tits. So groups of 4 or more bush tits, they tend to be slightly more young birds than older birds. So the higher bars on the right are telling you that more groups were either completely young birds or slightly more young birds than old birds. It was pretty unusual almost, in fact, almost never did we see groups that were completely adults. Some of this is maybe just that there's a lot of young bush tits out there. Any given year, bush tits have a lot of babies, and there's a lot of young bush tits out there. But it does also seem like young bush tits are making up a lot of these flocks. Looking at males versus females. Males on the left here with the dark eye, female on the right with the light eye. Almost exactly 50-50 males and females. Slightly skewed female, but very slight. Yeah, most groups here are a mix of males and females. That in itself is a little bit surprising. Birds often segregate by sex when they're not breeding, and the bush tits clearly aren't. So that's sort of interesting. Looking at the 5 biggest groups we've ever caught. Again, I just sort of wanted to see what's going on here. Always a mix of sexes. Always more young birds than old birds. If you're wondering why the numbers don't add up, there were some birds in here that we either couldn't sex or couldn't age. So the numbers don't add up. But yeah. So groups tend to be a mix of sexes. They tend to be more babies. Okay, but we wanted to know how long they stay associated, right? That was the point. So I had to add a bush tit onto this picture of bush tits because we got to have 4 bush tits. That's our groups, remember? So same idea as the individual associations graph. We have a lot of associations that last either less than a month or a month to 60 days, and then they decrease. A few that are lasting 400 or more than 400 days. I expected more. I think I expected longer associations using this approach. So it's interesting that we didn't get that. But it does seem like bush tits often have associations that last a few months, generally not more than a year. At this point, we had enough data that we could actually run some stats on it, though, and looked at probabilities. And so I can say that bush tits are more likely to reappear in the same group as each other if they are the same sex, which surprised me because remember, we keep seeing the sexes are mixed, so I didn't think there was much, impact of sex there. And also if they are first years when they first associate. I put a star next to this one because I kind of wonder if it's not just that if you're a first year when you first associate, you sort of have a longer, you have that extra year to reassociate, basically. But I'm not sure. It could genuinely be that that bonds formed when they're young are more enduring than bonds formed when they're older. So I want to keep looking into that. But yeah, this suggests that according to the statistics, bonds between same-sex bush tits are more likely to last longer and bonds formed when they are first years. You can also do really fun things looking at individual birds here. It gets a lot more fun to visualize and a lot harder to analyze. So we're going to do some visualization. I won't give you more stats because the stats gets tricky, but this is a social network. Each dot here is a bush tit. They're color coded by age. Each line between them means that they were caught together at least once. So that's an association. And you'll see quickly we've got some groups here. I've labeled a few individual long-lived bush tits that showed up repeatedly throughout the years. But for this, just check out, we've got some pretty big groups. These don't necessarily mean birds where everybody in that sort of connected blob was caught together. It just means that one of them was caught with one of them and then later was caught with another one and so on and so on. But you can see a few where they have a lot of bonds to each other. That means they were caught together. You can see that we have a lot of mixing of ages. So we have these green young birds mixed in with the yellow older birds. Um, we have some unknown age birds, but we often have older and younger birds mixed together. This is 1 year. You can do this for multiple years and track individual birds. So here I have circled the bird whose band number ends in 469. So in 2009 to 2010, 469 is a first year, this green dot in the top left, and it is buddies with an older bird and then three unknown age birds. The next year, it's a yellow dot because it's gotten 1 year older, and now it's buddies with a bunch of young birds, and then a few yellow dots that it's not directly being caught with, but it's being caught with birds that are caught with other birds that are caught with them. So probably the same flock. Um, and then the next year, it is no longer in a big group. It is orange because it's yet another year older, and it is now only associated with this even older red bird, but now not in that group. And you can do this with another bird. Here's 958 over the course of 6 years. Um, you can spend a lot of time doing this. I haven't entirely turned all of this into science yet, but we have this for, well, I said 7,000 captures. I think it's a little under 3,000 individual bush tits. And many of them have lived, yeah, 4 or 5 or 8 years. So yeah, there's a lot of bush tit social affiliations that I'm still investigating here. Other things that I do not have time to talk about, but just want to mention, we are working on some molecular work, so genetics related work, with a professor at Santa Clara University who actually has the genetics lab. Again, bringing in collaborators brings in resources. So we're genetically sexing yellow-rumped warblers, which in the winter often look very similar, as you can see from these pictures. Figuring out the sex is tricky, and so we're using genetics to help bolster our ability to do that. We're also using genetics to look at what plant-eating birds, specifically what plants they are eating, by collecting their poop and then running genomics on it. We're looking at how setting up your mist nets impacts the birds you get. So those mist nets, remember, is how we capture the birds. If you set them up differently, potentially that impacts the birds you catch, and that matters if different bird banding stations are setting their mist nets up differently. So we're checking that. We are using MODIS tags, which are these tiny tracking tags to track the movement of our birds. So on the bottom right here, you can see a hermit thrush, and then you can see the migration pathway of that exact hermit thrush flying from CCFS up to northern British Columbia to breed. These are all in various stages of data collection and analysis, but yeah, stay tuned. And of course, I absolutely need to thank everyone who's contributed to this. And I can't because it would fill the whole slide and more. But yeah, this data is absolutely more than one person could ever collect. SFBBO staff have contributed a ton. Community science volunteers have contributed several tons. Over 40 years, waking up early, being there on days when we catch just 3 birds and it's really boring. Being there on birds when we catch 100 Western flycatchers and it's really overwhelming. Sharing snacks, lots of learning from each other. Just yeah, none of this would exist without their work. Um, Yeah. Yep. And that's where I'll stop.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katie. That was really awesome. And I know that we're coming up to the end of the hour, but I know that Katie can stay longer to answer questions. So if you guys have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. I did have one quick question, Katie, and you might have mentioned this and I missed it, but those first two studies you shared about, did you talk about how you're sharing that information and where that information is going to the wider world?
Yeah, so the wildfire study, that's out. That's in a journal called Ornithology. It's open access, meaning you don't have to subscribe to the journal to get it. You can just find it online. You can also find all of our papers on the SFBBO website, including the ones that are not open access. But yeah, so that's out. That's in the scientific community. So other researchers will search papers when they're looking at things like the impacts of fire on birds. To get outside of the researcher community, we need to talk to people. So presentations like this, and yeah, and just anytime we're meeting with other conservationists, if wildfire comes up, you can mention it. The molt and climate change paper is, I think, days away from being published. We are just waiting for that final email from an editor, but that will be published soon. Same situation, so that will reach researchers. To reach folks outside of academia, we have to do a little more work, but yeah, but that's important. Um, yeah, and our goal is generally to get things published. Partly to reach researchers, but more because it's a really robust way to have information stick around. We could post all this on our website, but you always worry that the website gets, I don't know, we have a power outage or something. And now I can't think of anything that wouldn't be really terrible. But when you when things are in the paper of these journals, they really do stay, you can look up papers from 100 years ago. And so I know that it's there as a reference for if people need it. So that's kind of why we do aim for the academic journals, but we definitely don't want to stop there because yeah, academia is not everyone or even the majority of folks that are working in this space.
Thank you for that. And it's a great evidence of the impact that your work is making on the entire field, that you're able to get published in these professional journals and share that information and keep the conversation going and the curiosity going, and people can build on the work that each are doing. So thank you for that. We do have some questions. And so let me go back up to the first question that I saw, which is, can you see the fat on a raptor in the follicular hollow?
So I have banded raptors. I'm not extensively experienced in raptors. My understanding from folks who have worked a lot with raptors is that you can't really see it on raptors. I've looked at the raptors we've got and never seen much, and I've been told by dedicated raptor banders that they don't really bother. So yeah, I think raptors are doing something else. But yeah.
Good question. Thank you. The next question is, do birds learn to avoid the nets or the areas where you are netting?
Kind of. So bird banders know if you set up mist nets in the same place and you run them for several days, by day 3, you're getting like half or less of the birds you got on day 1. So birds absolutely learn if you just run the nets constantly. We run our nets no more than once a week. That seems to be enough that we keep getting the birds pretty steadily. Um, we will get the same birds often, just a month or two apart from the last capture. So they're not really learning. We'll also get birds, that migrate through where we'll get them in the same net once a year. And you'd think they'd at least, be in a slightly different net if they were learning. I think it's a hard thing to learn, honestly, when the net is only open for 5 hours once a week and you can't see it. You would, it would be like there's a force field in your neighborhood, but only a 12-meter force field and you don't know where it is and it's only on for 5 hours once a week, like I think it would take you a long time to figure out where that force field was. So the birds can learn, but if you make it hard by only putting the nets up periodically, it makes it really hard for them to learn.
Interesting. Thank you. The next question is, I wonder if you would ever be able to add two more dimensions to your groups analysis, which would be weather pattern or fires pattern and date.
Yeah, so I really want to put weather into the social analysis. There's been work uh, on other species looking at condition and sociality. And I would love to do that with the bush tits, especially since now we have this molt paper showing how they are impacted by things like drought years in other ways. So yeah, that's absolutely something I want to do. Wait,
Awesome.
weather pattern and what was the other one?
Date?
Um, date, are you I think okay, assuming you're thinking like season, that's already part of it. So we know that pretty much every bird has different social patterns when they're breeding versus non-breeding. Um, so yeah, so we're already looking at that. I mean, that was one of the things I wanted to look at with our long-term individual associations, and that was a one of the many things that came out as having absolutely no impact whatsoever. But yes, that's another important one.
And also in parentheses, along with weather, was the patterns of fires.
Yeah, that maybe it's harder with the fires just because we haven't had that many, which is fine. I don't want it to get easier. But to statistically test something, you need a lot of events basically. And so with that was part of why we needed this stats expert for the wildfire paper. And that worked because we had a lot of smoky days, even if we didn't have a lot of like individual fire events. Yeah, I think we would need a few more fires. So let's do that in 30 years.
Right. Thank you. Um, Lots of thank yous and lots of comments about what a great presentation. One question is, is there somewhere you can see the presentation? Yes, we will be editing this and putting it on our YouTube channel and on our website, so stay tuned for that. Another question is, have you seen the effect of avian flu on wild birds?
Yeah, so that's a thing we are definitely watching out for. So if you don't know, highly pathogenic avian influenza has been a thing for a few years now. It's hitting water birds really hard. It's hitting some raptors pretty hard. Often the raptors that eat water birds. Um, it's also hitting people's backyard flocks and poultry operations, which is part of why you can't buy eggs anymore, and also getting into dairy farms. But from a wild bird perspective, uh, it's been almost not at all in songbirds. I mean, very, very few detections in songbirds. So we're watching for it, both because we want to know if it's in our birds, but also, I mean, from a health perspective, um, we don't want this thing jumping to people. We know it can jump to people, and we really don't want to be ground zero for the next pandemic at CCFS. So we're definitely watching out for it. It's not showing up in songbirds. You can look for symptoms. Not every bird is symptomatic, but some will be. We haven't seen symptoms in our birds. Um, just in general, it's not showing up in even like the groups of birds we catch. If we were working with waterfowl, I would be a lot more worried. If we got a lot of raptors, I would be more worried. Um, as it is, we're not seeing it in our birds, but we're watching. Um, and you know, every 6 months you find a dead hawk and you wonder if that was the flu. But yeah. So far no, and cross fingers that it stays no.
Thank you, and we're glad that you're watching as well. I guess maybe to wrap up, talk a little bit about how your work is funded and how people can get involved.
Yeah, so we are almost entirely funded by your support. So you can apply for grants for research. It is famously hard to get grants for long-term studies. Grants really like something that is short and sweet, and we are, 40 plus years on, and for, I mean, for a good reason. These questions that we're asking, you need many, many years of data. Not to mention, if you want to know what's happening with birds now, with climate change, with wildfire smoke, you need the data now. You can't stop and then want to know what's happening now. But that means it's hard for us to get grants. So we do try, but we are primarily funded by donations. Also, I mean, a lot of the person power going into this is a donation of time from our volunteers. But yeah, this is a community effort, which is amazing. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. And we are in the middle of our spring appeal. So if people want to support work like this, please go ahead and make a donation to our spring appeal. And it goes to this and other programs that we're doing. So it doesn't look like there was any more questions. So thank you, Katie, for a fantastic presentation, and also for the really deep work that you're doing there and your ability to pull together so many collaborations in communities and get things published on the national and international level. It's really impressive. And thank you to everybody for attending the talk tonight. We will be reaching out soon with a link to the talk, and we hope that you'll share it with your friends and family and colleagues, and hope you have a wonderful end of your Earth Day. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Have a good night.
SFBBO is a nonprofit. With your support, we will continue to inform decision makers, inspire people to act, and involve diverse communities in our work. Please visit our website to learn more and get involved today.